Sing a song for us, Leo. In a middle school music class, an arrogant teacher's casual request for a quiet student to sing turns into a moment of public humiliation. But the laughter quickly turns to stunned silence as the boy, a student named Leo, reveals a powerful hidden gift for opera. This single defiant act of talent becomes the catalyst for an incredible journey, as Leo is propelled from the quiet anonymity of his struggling family to the bright lights of national competitions. If you liked the video and have subscribed to my channel, let's move on to our story. Enjoy watching. Leo Davis was a ghost. Not in the spooky, rattling chains kind of way, but in the way of a person who occupies space without leaving an impression. He moved through the halls of Jefferson Middle School like a whisper in a crowd, a shadow that never quite attached itself to a body. At 12 years old, with long limbs he was still growing into and eyes that seemed perpetually focused on something distant. He had mastered the art of being invisible. His school day was a meticulous routine of non-engagement. He arrived on time, his worn backpack slung over one shoulder, and slid into his seat in the back of the classroom. He answered questions only when directly called upon, his voice a low hum that was quickly absorbed by the ambient noise. During lunch, he sat at the far end of a table, methodically eating the sandwich his mother had packed, his gaze fixed on the endless stream of students, their laughter and conversations a chaotic symphony he observed from afar. He wasn't disliked, he simply wasn't noticed. He was a piece of the furniture, as much a fixture as the old lockers with peeling paint or the perpetually sticky floors. He was okay with it. In fact, he preferred it. The quiet was a shield, a necessary armor that kept the chaos of the world at a manageable distance. After the final bell, he would walk home, a journey of 11 city blocks that took him from the manicured lawns of the school district to the weary, brick-faced buildings of his own neighborhood. The transition was stark, a shift from the bright, loud world of other people's lives to the muted, gray reality of his own. He would nod briefly at the other kids on the block, but he never lingered. He went straight to the small two-story house on Maple Street, the one with the cracked front steps and the single stubborn rose bush that somehow managed to bloom every spring. Inside, the house was a sanctuary, albeit a fragile one. The air was heavy with the scent of his mother's cooking, a mix of garlic, spices, and a deep, comforting warmth. His mother, Beatrice, was a woman whose hands were never idle. She was always kneading dough, mending clothes, or cleaning something that didn't look dirty. Her smile, when it came, was a tired but beautiful thing, a testament to a strength that ran deeper than bone. His father, William, worked 2 jobs, one at the steel mill, one driving a truck on weekends, and was rarely home before Leo was already finishing his homework. The house hummed with the quiet tension of people who worked too hard for too little. There was a constant, unspoken awareness of the budget, of the bills taped to the refrigerator door, of the need to make do. Leo knew they were struggling, not in a way that left them without food, but in a way that chipped away at their spirits. He saw it in the way his mother would sigh as she put a basket of laundry down, the way his father's shoulders seemed to slump a little more each evening. It was this awareness that made him retreat further into himself, to feel the weight of his family's burdens as if they were his own. He wanted to help, to lighten their load, but he was just a kid. There wasn't anything he could do. That wasn't entirely true. In the quiet solitude of his bedroom, with a towel wedged under the door and a pillow pressed to the cracked wall to dampen the sound, Leo had a secret. A magnificent, powerful, and utterly terrifying secret. He could sing. Not the casual off-key singing of a middle schooler, but something else entirely. He had stumbled upon it by accident a few years ago. He had found an old, scratched vinyl record in a box of his grandmother's belongings, and a voice had filled the room, a soaring, heart-wrenching sound that belonged to another world. It was a recording of the great opera singer Luciano Pavarotti, and it had felt like a bolt of lightning. The sound was so pure, so full of emotion, that it had moved him to his core. He had spent the next few months listening to every opera recording he could find at the local library, the librarians watching with a mixture of curiosity and amusement as the quiet boy checked out obscure recordings of Verdi and Puccini. He listened in his headphones, studying the way the singers' voices swelled and dipped, the way they conveyed sorrow and joy with nothing but a breath. And then one day, alone in his room, he had tried to mimic a note. What came out was not a clumsy imitation, but a sound that surprised even himself. It was a note, and then another, that was clean, resonant, and impossibly beautiful. He practiced in secret, his voice a hidden instrument that he carefully honed, a private world he could enter where the weight of his family's struggles and the invisibility of his school life simply vanished. He practiced the breathing techniques he read about online, the postures he saw in old videos. He trained himself to hold a note for what seemed like an eternity, his young lungs burning with the effort. When he sang, he wasn't Leo, the quiet kid from Maple Street. He was someone else, someone strong, someone with a voice that could move mountains. But he had never sung for anyone else. Not for his parents, not for the one or two kids who had tried to talk to him. The secret was his and his alone, too precious and too vulnerable to be exposed to the outside world. He knew what a group of middle schoolers would do to a kid who wanted to sing opera. He had seen the way they tore into anything that was different, anything that stood out. He had seen it happen to others, and he was terrified of it happening to him. Tonight, as he sat on his bed, the sun bleeding orange and purple through the grimy window pane, he felt the familiar pull. The notes from a recording of an Italian aria, Nessun Dorma, played softly through his headphones. His fingers traced the faded cover of the album as the music built to a crescendo. He closed his eyes, took a deep, steadying breath, and prepared to enter the only world where he truly belonged, the world of sound. The music room was a place of organized chaos. Flanked by walls plastered with yellowing posters of composers with wild hair and stern expressions, it was a space that smelled of old wood, dust, and the faint metallic tang of brass instruments. Clarinets lay in pieces on cluttered desks, drumsticks were scattered across the floor, and a single mournful trombone stood propped against the grand piano, its bell pointing towards the ceiling like a lonely sentinel. In the middle of it all stood Mr. Harrison, the conductor of this cacophony. Mr. Harrison was a man who saw himself as a maestro trapped in a middle school. With a head of thinning silver hair that he constantly smoothed back with a dramatic flourish and a neatly trimmed mustache that quivered with every pronounced syllable, he carried an air of self-importance that was almost theatrical. He wore tailored blazers with elbow patches, even though they were a size too small, and his hands, always in motion, were bony and expressive. He spoke with a booming, performative voice, as if every lesson were a private concerto for his own amusement. His teaching style was a mixture of grand pronouncements and sharp, condescending humor. He would stride across the room, his posture ramrod straight, and deliver a short lecture on the proper posture for a cellist, only to then mock a student who failed to grasp his instructions. He believed that his students were not there to learn, but to be a backdrop for his own genius. He would play a complex, rapid-fire piece on the piano with a flourish of his long, spidery fingers, and then scoff at the sea of blank faces looking back at him. "What's the matter, children?" he would bellow, a smile playing on his lips. "Don't you understand true art? Perhaps you're more suited to those dreadful pop tunes with their mindless, repetitive beats." The other students, unsure of how to react, would offer up a nervous, stifled laugh. For Leo, music class was another period of quiet observation. He sat in the last row, near the percussion instruments, which he knew instinctively how to avoid making eye contact with. He would open the sheet music, a well-worn copy of a basic scale, and pretend to follow along, his gaze fixed on the notes but his mind a million miles away. He could hear the music in his head, but it wasn't the simple, plodding tune on the page. It was a rich, complex orchestra, the sound of a full chorus, the powerful, soaring voice of a tenor filling every corner of his mind. He was in his own world, a world where music was not a subject to be learned, but a language to be spoken. Today, Mr. Harrison was demonstrating breathing techniques. He stood at the front of the room, his chest puffed out like a proud pigeon, his eyes closed in a moment of self-absorption. "It's from the diaphragm, children," he announced, his voice a deep baritone. "Not from the lungs. You must fill your belly with air, not just your chest. It's the very soul of the sound." He then had the students stand and place their hands on their stomachs, instructing them to inhale deeply. The room filled with the collective sound of shaky breaths, a weak and uncertain symphony. As he walked down the aisle, offering a critique to each student, Leo felt a familiar, crawling sense of dread. He knew he was next. He knew that any moment Mr. Harrison's mocking gaze would fall upon him, and he would be forced to participate in the cruel charade. He tried to make himself smaller, to shrink into his chair, but it was no use. Mr. Harrison stopped at his desk, his eyes narrowing slightly as he looked at the boy who never spoke, who always seemed to be somewhere else. "And what about you, Mr. Davis?" he said, his voice dripping with playful malice. "Do you think you have what it takes to produce a sound that resonates?" The other students, sensing the impending punchline, tittered nervously. They were used to Mr. Harrison's cruelty, and they had learned that to be on the right side of it, you had to be a part of the joke. Leo did not respond. He simply looked up at the man, his eyes calm and unblinking, but inside, his heart was a frantic drum, a rhythm he could not control. He knew this was it. This was the moment he had always feared, the moment his carefully constructed wall of invisibility would be breached. He was about to be seen. Mr. Harrison's smirk widened. "The strong silent type, are we? Perhaps you're saving your voice for the great opera stage." He chuckled at his own joke, and a few more students joined in, a little louder this time. He gestured with his hands as if conducting an imaginary orchestra, a final flourish of his theatrical performance. "Come on now, just a little note. A simple scale. Let's hear it." The moment hung in the air, heavy and charged. The quiet boy and the arrogant teacher, two forces about to collide. The class waited with bated breath, their gaze fixed on Leo, no longer a ghost but a focal point. They expected a laugh. They expected a clumsy off-key sound. They expected a spectacle. Leo took a deep breath, not from his lungs but from his belly, a technique he had practiced countless times in the solitude of his room. He was ready to give them what they expected, a weak, small voice that would quickly fade into the background. But then, as he opened his mouth, something inside him shifted. The fear was still there, but it was being pushed aside by something else. A flicker of defiance. A sudden, fierce, and undeniable need to be heard. The tension in the music room was a living, breathing thing. It hung in the air, a silent judgment waiting to be passed. Mr. Harrison stood over Leo, his shadow long and imposing in the afternoon light. He gestured dramatically, his smug smile broadcasting to the entire class that what was about to happen was a foregone conclusion. "Come now, Mr. Davis," he said, his voice a low, theatrical purr. "Just a little sound. For your adoring audience." A few of the students in the front row giggled, their faces lit up with the cruel anticipation of a joke. They expected a mouse's squeak, a faltering note, a pathetic attempt that would validate their assumptions about the quiet kid who never spoke. Leo felt the familiar panic rising in his chest, a cold, tightening coil. He could do it. He could give them what they wanted. He could produce a small, uncertain noise, a voice that would fade into the background and allow him to retreat into his shell. He took a short, shallow breath and opened his mouth. A weak, reedy note, a single, flat tone, barely escaped his lips. The tittering from the class grew a little louder, a few outright laughs breaking the nervous quiet. Mr. Harrison's smirk widened, his eyes twinkling with a triumphant, condescending glee. "You see," he began, turning to the class. "Some of us are simply not cut out for." But as he spoke, something inside Leo snapped. The small, flat sound was not him. It was a performance, a lie he had been living for years, and in that moment of public humiliation, a fierce, desperate defiance welled up from the very core of his being. The shame was suffocating, but it was nothing compared to the anger he felt at himself for allowing his fear to keep him so small. He thought of his parents' tired shoulders, of the bills on the refrigerator, of the grand, soaring music that was his one true sanctuary. He closed his eyes and took a different kind of breath. Not a quick, nervous gasp, but a deep, deliberate inhalation that filled his lungs and, as Mr. Harrison had so mockingly instructed, settled in his diaphragm. The note that came out next was not the one they expected. It was a single, pure sound, a sustained "ah," that vibrated with a power that felt impossibly large for his small frame. It was clean, resonant, and so full of emotion that it seemed to hang in the air like a physical object. It was a sound that had been honed in the quiet solitude of his bedroom, a sound that had been waiting for its moment in the light. The room fell silent. Not the nervous silence from before, but a true, stunned, and reverent quiet. The laughter died on the students' lips. Their expressions went from mockery to pure, unadulterated shock. They looked at each other and then back at Leo, their eyes wide with disbelief. Mr. Harrison's face was a study in profound, shattering disbelief. His smirk vanished, his mouth fell open, and his elegant posture seemed to melt. The condescending gleam in his eyes was replaced by a look of utter, humbled awe. He stood there, statue still, his arms hanging limp at his sides as the single note soared, filling every corner of the room. It was not just a note, it was a revelation. It was the sound of a voice that had been hidden away, a powerful and raw talent that defied all his expectations, all his assumptions. He was looking at a masterpiece he had, just moments ago, been ready to dismiss as a joke. Leo held the note for what seemed like an eternity, the sound of physical extension of his soul. He didn't stop there. The note transitioned into a phrase, a sweeping melodic passage from the aria he loved so dearly. Nessun dorma, the words he had sung countless times in his room, now filled the classroom. His voice, once a whisper, was now a commanding roar, a force of nature. It was no longer a middle schooler singing, it was a performer. The notes rose and fell with a heartbreaking tenderness, and then swelled with an exhilarating power that made the glass panes on the windows seem to hum in sympathy. Just as the music reached its emotional crescendo, a new presence appeared in the doorway. It was Principal Evans, a woman with a no-nonsense demeanor and a kind face that was usually hidden behind a stern expression. She had been walking down the hall, lost in thought, when the sound had stopped her in her tracks. She had frozen, her hands still on the doorframe, her eyes fixed on the boy in the last row. Her face, too, was a mix of shock and something else, a deep, profound recognition. She had heard something special. She had heard a talent that was rare, not just for a middle school but for anywhere. When Leo finished, the silence in the room was deafening. He stood there, his chest heaving, his eyes still closed, a mix of terror and exhilaration coursing through him. For the first time in his life, he had given the world a piece of his true self. And the world had simply stopped and listened. It was Principal Evans who finally broke the silence. She stepped into the room, her gaze never leaving Leo. "That was stunning," she said, her voice quiet but firm, cutting through the heavy silence. She then looked at Mr. Harrison, who was still standing there, a ghost of the man he had been just moments before. "Mr. Harrison, I'd like a word with you in my office. Now." She turned back to Leo, a small, knowing smile on her face. "You can come with me, Leo. We have a lot to talk about." Leo nodded slowly, his mind a whirlwind of confusion and fear, but a new feeling had begun to bloom in his chest, the fragile, beautiful hope of a secret finally being set free. He was no longer a ghost. He was seen. And his journey was just beginning. The walk from the music room to the principal's office was the longest and most surreal 11 city blocks of Leo's life. Mr. Harrison, his theatrical bravado completely deflated, scurried ahead like a nervous puppy. Leo, still reeling, walked behind Principal Evans, who moved with a calm and decisive purpose that felt like a force of nature. The hallways, usually a river of loud, rushing students, were almost empty now, the last stragglers having disappeared. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the echo of their footsteps. Leo kept his gaze on the back of Principal Evans's sensible brown shoes, a small, tangible detail in a world that had just been turned upside down. His heart, which had been a frantic drum moments before, was now a slow, heavy thud. He felt a strange mixture of relief and terror. The secret was out. The invisible wall was gone. He was seen. When they arrived at the principal's office, she gestured for them to enter. The room was not what Leo had expected. It wasn't a sterile, imposing space of punishment. It was warm, lined with bookshelves filled with books that looked well-read, and a single vibrant African violet sat on her desk. The air smelled of old paper and peppermint. Principal Evans sat down behind her desk, her gaze steady and direct, and motioned for them to take the two chairs facing her. Mr. Harrison collapsed into one, his shoulders slumped, his face a portrait of professional ruin. Leo took the other, his back straight, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, a small gesture of his own deeply ingrained anxiety. Principal Evans leaned forward, her elbows on the desk, her fingers interlaced. She didn't look angry, she looked thoughtful, like a person who had just solved a complicated puzzle. "Mr. Harrison," she began, her voice calm and even, but with a razor's edge of authority. "I was walking by your classroom today. I heard something extraordinary. And then I heard you. I heard what you said to Leo before he sang. I heard you trying to dismiss him, to turn his quietness into a punchline." Mr. Harrison's pale face flushed with a crimson blush. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Principal Evans, I assure you it was all in jest. I was simply trying to—" "You were bullying a student, Mr. Harrison," she cut in, her voice never rising above a conversational tone. You were using your position to mock a child who was simply trying to survive a day in your classroom. And for that, there will be consequences. We'll discuss those later. But for now, I want you to sit here and listen. Really listen for a change." She then turned her attention to Leo, her expression softening. "Leo," she said, and the way she said his name was different. It wasn't a casual greeting, it was an acknowledgement. "What I heard just now was something special. That was not a sound that can be learned in a middle school music class. That was a gift. Am I right?" Leo nodded slowly, unable to form words. He still couldn't believe this was happening. "I have never heard a voice like that from a child your age, and I've been in this profession for over 20 years, she continued, her gaze unwavering. "It's raw, yes, untrained. But the potential, the power in it, that is what matters. A voice like that shouldn't be a secret, Leo. It needs to be heard." Leo's eyes flickered to Mr. Harrison, who sat staring at the floor, his once arrogant posture now completely gone. The contrast was stark. The man who had been a theatrical showman was now a small, pathetic figure. Leo looked back at Principal Evans, a flicker of hope starting to warm the cold knot of fear in his stomach. "I'm going to do something to help you," she stated, her voice full of determination. "The school has a modest discretionary fund for students with exceptional talents. I'm also connected with some people in the arts community in the city, people who might be able to help us find you a proper coach. We can't have your voice go to waste. I want to find you a coach who can work with you, not just on the scales you've already mastered in secret, but on the true art of opera. Someone who can help you develop your technique, your breathing, and your stage presence. I want to enter you into some local competitions, perhaps a regional one, and see where this can take you." The thought of standing on a stage, a spotlight shining on him, filled Leo with a familiar terror. I don't know," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "It costs a lot of money and I don't like all the attention." Principal Evans held up a hand. "Don't you worry about the money, Leo. That's what the fund is for. And as for the attention, that's what we'll work on. You have a voice that commands attention. You have to learn to embrace it, not run from it." She then looked pointedly at Mr. Harrison. "And as for you, Mr. Harrison, you will be Leo's accompanist from now on. You will meet with him after school twice a week on Mondays and Thursdays to practice. You will assist him in preparing for any competitions and help with the logistics. You will be his advocate, not his bully. This is not up for discussion. I expect you to be there, and I expect you to be professional and supportive in every way." Mr. Harrison's head shot up, his eyes wide with disbelief. To be commanded to serve the very student he had just humiliated was the ultimate punishment. It was not a demotion, it was a re-education. It was a forced lesson in humility. He opened his mouth to protest, but one look at Principal Evans's unwavering expression was enough to silence him. He gave a single, curt nod. Principal Evans turned back to Leo, her face all kindness again. "This is a big step, Leo. It's a lot to ask of you. But I truly believe you are meant for great things. I want you to think about it. Talk to your parents. I will call them this evening. But I want you to know the school is behind you. I am behind you." Leo rose from his chair, a new sensation rippling through him. It was a feeling he couldn't quite name, but it felt a little like hope. He nodded once more, his eyes filled with a gratitude he couldn't articulate. He left the office, leaving the humbled Mr. Harrison and the resolute Principal Evans behind. As he walked back down the hallway, the setting sun painting long, golden streaks on the floor, he was no longer a ghost. He was on a path that was both terrifying and exhilarating. The world had just gotten so much bigger, and it was waiting to hear what he had to say. The walk home was a blur. The afternoon sun, once a golden promise of a new day, now felt like a spotlight. Leo moved through the familiar streets as if in a trance, the heavy backpack on his shoulders feeling lighter than the immense weight of the truth he now carried. He was no longer just a boy. He was a boy with a secret that was no longer a secret. His mind replayed the day's events in a frantic loop. The sneer on Mr. Harrison's face, the stunned silence of the class, the firm, unwavering gaze of Principal Evans. It was all a dream, a wild, unbelievable fantasy that had somehow become real. He was so lost in his thoughts that he almost walked past his own front door. Their apartment was on the third floor of a 3-story building that smelled of fried food and stale laundry. The walls were thin enough that he could hear his neighbor's television through the plaster. Inside, the small living room was his sanctuary. It was cluttered but warm, a space that was entirely theirs. His mother, a woman with hands calloused from years of work and eyes perpetually tired but full of a love that was a constant in his life, was in the kitchen, a pan sizzling on the stove. The scent of onions and garlic filled the air, a familiar comfort. His father, a man with a perpetually furrowed brow and shoulders that seemed to carry the weight of the world, was at the small wobbly dining table, meticulously going over a stack of bills. "Leo, you're home," his mother said, not turning from the stove. She already knew the answer to the unspoken question of his day. She could see it in the slope of his shoulders, the slow drag of his feet. She simply accepted it. Leo dropped his backpack with a soft thud and sat down at the table, watching his father's pencil move from one column to another, a quiet dance of financial stress he knew so well. He took a deep breath, and the words, once so impossible to say, now came spilling out. "Something happened today." His father looked up, his expression a mixture of fatigue and concern. His mother turned from the stove, a wooden spoon still in her hand, her gaze now fixed entirely on him. Leo told them everything from the moment Mr. Harrison called on him to the final, stunning revelation in Principal Evans's office. He left nothing out, the humiliation, the fear, the sudden, glorious surge of defiance. When he finished, the silence in the apartment was heavier than it had ever been. His father set the pencil down with a soft click. He ran a weary hand over his face. "Son," he said, his voice low and cautious. "You know we're proud of you. Always. But opera? Competitions? That's for people with money. With connections. We don't have that, Leo." The words, though gentle, were a bucket of cold water. They weren't meant to hurt, only to ground him in the harsh reality they all knew. They were a reminder of every bill, every late night, every impossible choice they had to make. "Principal Evans said the school would pay for it," Leo said, his voice a small, desperate plea. "She said they have a fund. She said she knows people." His mother walked over and sat beside him, taking his hand in hers. Her palm was rough, her touch soft. "Baby," she said, her voice filled with a heartbreaking tenderness. "People promise things. And sometimes, those promises don't work out. What if we get our hopes up? What if it all falls apart?" The question wasn't a challenge, it was an expression of a deep-seated fear. They had learned to manage their expectations, to hope for the small things and not the grand, impossible dreams. Just then, as if on cue, the phone rang. Leo's father, his eyes still on Leo, answered it. "Hello? Yes, this is Mr. Davis. Yes, he's right here. It's for you, Leo." "It's the principal." Leo's father handed him the phone, his face a mix of suspicion and dawning hope. Leo put the phone to his ear, his hand shaking slightly. "Hello, Principal Evans?" Her voice, calm and reassuring, cut through the noise of their fear. "Hello, Leo. I'm calling to speak with your parents. I want to tell them what I told you. I want to explain what an extraordinary talent you have, and what the school and I are prepared to do to help you cultivate it." Leo handed the phone to his father, who listened, his expression slowly changing from doubt to a quiet, astonished belief. He nodded, said a few words, and then passed the phone to his wife, who listened with wide, teary eyes. When she finally hung up, she looked at Leo, a smile spreading across her face. It was the kind of smile she reserved for holidays, for birthdays, for moments of pure, unadulterated joy. "She's not playing around," she whispered. "She believes in you, baby. She really believes." The room filled with a new kind of silence, one of relief and quiet celebration. They talked for hours, his parents asking questions, Leo answering them with a newfound confidence, a sense of belonging he had never felt before. The dream was no longer his alone, it was theirs. They were a team. The following Monday, Leo walked to the music room after school for his first official practice. The room, which had always felt like a battlefield, now felt like a strange, hallowed ground. Mr. Harrison was already there, hunched over the piano, his back to the door. He didn't turn around when Leo entered. He simply played a slow, deliberate scale, the notes clean and resonant. Leo walked to the piano, his heart pounding. "Mr. Harrison?" he said, his voice a tentative whisper. The man turned, and his face was a blank mask. Gone was the condescending smirk, the theatrical gestures. In their place was a professional stoicism, a carefully constructed wall of cool distance. "You're late," he said, his voice flat. Punctuality is a key component of a good performance. I'm sorry, Leo said, a wave of familiar anxiety washing over him. It's fine, Mr. Harrison said, his gaze fixed on the sheet music. We have a lot of work to do. Principal Evans provided a list of classical pieces. We'll start with something simple. Something that will help us gauge your range. He slid a piece of music onto the stand. Your voice, though it is a powerful instrument, is a wild one. It's undisciplined. It's like a racehorse that has never been bridled. Can run fast and free, but it has no direction. My job is to give you that direction. He looked up at Leo, his eyes cold and unyielding. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this because I am commanded to do so. Our personal feelings do not matter. The only thing that matters is the music. He turned back to the piano, his hands hovering over the keys. Now, he said, his voice a low command. Let us begin. The music room, once a place of mockery and humiliation, was now a place of tense, professional collaboration. The relationship between the two of them was far from easy. It was filled with a lingering resentment, a forced politeness, and a silent, unspoken power dynamic that had been completely reversed. The student was now the one in control, his talent an invisible weapon that commanded the respect of his teacher. The journey was just beginning, and Leo knew with a certainty that settled deep in his soul that the road ahead would be anything but smooth. But he wasn't alone. And for the first time in his life, that was enough. The rhythm of Leo's life had been completely upended. The quiet, solitary existence he had once known was now punctuated by the jarring, insistent tick-tock of a clock on the music room wall. Mondays and Thursdays, the same routine began. The final school bell would ring, a shrill, mocking herald of freedom for his classmates, but for Leo it was a summons. He would make his way down the long, silent hallway to the music room, a place that now felt less like a classroom and more like a high-stakes workshop. Mr. Harrison would already be there, perched on the piano bench, a silent, disapproving statue. He never greeted Leo, never made small talk. His only communication was through the stern, precise notes he played on the piano and the cutting, technical critiques he delivered with the surgical coldness of a man who had been forced into a task he resented. Your breath support is still a house of cards, Davis, Mr. Harrison would snap, his fingers freezing mid-air over the keys. It's all raw power and no foundation. When you hold that note, I want to see your stomach, not your shoulders. Your shoulders are for carrying a backpack, not a melody. The sessions were grueling. Mr. Harrison pushed him relentlessly, not with encouragement, but with a stark, brutal honesty that was far more effective than any flattery. He forced Leo to sing scales until his throat ached, to repeat phrases until the notes felt like a natural extension of his own body. He made him practice singing while walking, while standing still, while sitting. He taught him about the intricate mechanics of the voice, the science of resonance and projection, the physics of a sustained note. And through it all, his face remained a mask of professional disinterest, his silence during the rare moments of a flawless performance more telling than any compliment could have been. One day, Leo was struggling with a particularly difficult passage, a soaring crescendo that required a delicate balance of power and control. He tried it once, his voice cracking on the final note. Mr. Harrison simply played the passage again. Leo tried a second time, his voice a little stronger, but the sound was still strained. The third time something clicked. He remembered what Mr. Harrison had said about his diaphragm, about the source of his power. He took a deep, deliberate breath and, with a newfound sense of purpose, sang the phrase again. The note was clean, the power pure and controlled. It soared, a beautiful, flawless arc that filled the room. When he finished, he looked at Mr. Harrison, half expecting a critique. But Mr. Harrison was staring at the sheet music, his hands motionless on the keys. A single, almost imperceptible nod was all Leo received. It was the highest praise he had ever gotten. At home, the atmosphere was completely different. The house was a sanctuary, a place where his talent was celebrated, not critiqued. His mother would sit at the kitchen table, her eyes shining with pride as she listened to him practice the songs Mr. Harrison had assigned. His father, the furrowed brow of worry still a constant companion, would often hum along with him, a deep, melodic bass line to Leo's soaring tenor. Money was still tight, but his parents found a way. Extra work hours, smaller sacrifices, 100 tiny adjustments to their already strained budget. They bought him a small digital voice recorder to listen to himself and a notebook to jot down Mr. Harrison's notes. His mother would pack him a small thermos of herbal tea before every practice, a remedy for his aching throat and a quiet gesture of her unwavering love. "We believe in you, baby," she would whisper, her hands cupping his face. "Just go out there and be yourself. The rest will follow." The day of the first competition arrived, a cold Saturday morning in late October. It was a regional arts festival held in a small historic theater downtown. The lobby was a whirlwind of motion, a sea of bright-eyed nervous teenagers and their equally anxious parents. The air thrummed with the sound of warm-ups, a strange, discordant symphony of scales and arias. Leo felt the familiar, suffocating panic rising in his chest. He was a fish out of water. These kids were confident, polished. They had been in competition since they were toddlers. He was the quiet kid from the projects, a secret no more but still an outsider. Mr. Harrison met them at the entrance, dressed in an impeccably tailored black suit. He was all business, a cold, unyielding wall of professionalism. He handed Leo a program and gave him a curt nod. "Find a seat and wait your turn," he said, his voice a low, emotionless command. "And don't forget to breathe." Leo and his parents found a row of empty seats and sat down. His mother took his hand and squeezed it. His father leaned over and whispered, "Just sing, son. The rest is just noise." The performers were introduced one by one, each one a testament to years of dedicated training. They were all good, some were great, their voices soaring and falling with the practiced ease of professionals. Leo watched, his stomach churning, his mind a whirlwind of doubt. Could he do this? Was he really cut out for this world? Was he a fraud? And then his name was called. Next up, from Jefferson Middle School we have Leo Davis. He will be singing Una furtiva lagrima, from the opera L'Elysir d'Amour. He walked onto the stage, the spotlights blinding, the sea of faces in the audience an intimidating, anonymous blur. He found his mark in the center of the stage and looked over at the piano, where Mr. Harrison sat, his face a perfect blank. He took a deep breath, the lessons flooding back to him. The breath was not his own, it was Mr. Harrison's. The discipline, the technique, it was all there. He nodded to Mr. Harrison, who began to play the opening notes, the melody of the beautiful Italian aria, both sad and triumphant. For the first few lines, Leo's voice was a little shaky, a little uncertain. But as the music swelled, as the emotion of the song took over, something shifted. He wasn't on a stage anymore. He wasn't in a competition. He was in his room, singing to himself, singing his heart out, a torrent of sound that was both a cry and a celebration. The music was a language that transcended the barriers of class and race. It was a universal language, and for the first time in his life, Leo felt like he could speak it perfectly. He let go of his fear, and his voice took over, filling the theater with a sound that was pure, raw, and undeniably brilliant. The crowd sat in stunned silence, completely captivated by the powerful, emotional performance of this young boy who had appeared out of nowhere. When he finished, a thunderous applause erupted. It was not polite, it was a roaring wave of appreciation that washed over him. He bowed, his eyes now open, and he saw his parents standing in the back row, his mother with tears streaming down her face and his father giving him a wide, proud smile. He also saw Mr. Harrison, his face still a mask of professional stoicism, but for a split second, a single fleeting moment, his eyes met Leo's. And Leo saw something there. Not a smile, not a compliment, but a flash of something that looked a lot like a grudging respect. The competition wasn't over and there would be more to come, but in that moment, Leo knew that he had won. Not a prize, but something much more important. He had won the right to be himself. The announcement of the winner was a blur, a disembodied voice over a crackling PA system that seemed to take an eternity to utter the words that would change everything. The crowd's applause, which had been a low hum of chatter moments before, erupted into a sudden, deafening roar. Leo's name, echoing through the historic theater, felt like a thunderclap. He stood there, frozen in the center of the stage, the heavy bronze medallion feeling like a lead weight against his chest, a tangible testament to an impossible victory. He looked out into the crowd, his eyes searching, and found his parents in the back row, standing on their tiptoes, their faces a radiant beacon of pure, unadulterated joy. For the first time he felt something more than relief. He felt pride. The win at the regional competition was more than just a trophy and a medal. It was a watershed moment. The day he returned to Jefferson Middle School, he was no longer a ghost. He was an anomaly. His classmates who had once laughed at him, now looked at him with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Whispers followed him down the hallways. "That's the kid who sings opera." The bullying had stopped, replaced by a kind of quiet, respectful distance. Even the most popular kids, the ones who had once ruled the social hierarchy with an iron fist, gave him a wide berth, a look in their eyes that said, "I don't get it, but I know it's something special." For the first time, Leo was no longer invisible. He was seen, and that was more terrifying and exhilarating than he had ever imagined. His twice-weekly sessions with Mr. Harrison took on a new, more intense dynamic. The first victory had done something to the man, had chipped away at the wall of professional coldness he had so meticulously built. The forced politeness began to thaw, replaced by a grudging, almost silent collaboration. Mr. Harrison still didn't offer compliments, but his critiques became less about punishment and more about a shared pursuit of perfection. He would lean in closer to the piano, his fingers hovering over the keys, his brow furrowed in concentration, as if he were trying to coax something more out of Leo, something even he knew was possible. "Your vibrato," he said one afternoon, his voice low and raspy. "It's lazy. It's like a bird that's forgotten how to fly. We need to work on your diaphragm control. Let's take it from the top." He no longer looked like a man serving a sentence. He looked like a man obsessed, a man who had stumbled upon a diamond in the rough and was now compelled to polish it. The relationship was still a long way from warm, but it was no longer a battle of wills. It was a partnership, born not of affection, but of a shared reverence for the music. A few weeks after the win, Principal Evans called Leo and his parents into her office again. The African violet on her desk was blooming. "I'm so proud of you, Leo," she began, her voice brimming with a quiet warmth. "I knew you could do it. And this is just the beginning." She gestured to a chair where a tall, elegant woman with a shock of silver hair and kind, perceptive eyes was sitting. "Leo, I'd like you to meet Mrs. Eleanor Vance. She is a voice professor at the City Conservatory, and she has agreed to take you on as a private student. She is one of the best in the city, and she believes your talent is something we must all cultivate." Mrs. Vance smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "I've heard about you, Leo Davis," she said, her voice a low, melodic purr. "Principal Evans sent me a recording of your performance. It's remarkable." "Rah, yes. But the instrument, it's a Stradivarius. It is my great honor to guide you." The thought of working with a professional, a true expert in the field, was both thrilling and terrifying. Leo felt a surge of hope, a sudden glimpse into a world that had once seemed completely out of reach. Mrs. Vance's lessons were a revelation. She was the opposite of Mr. Harrison, all encouragement and gentle guidance. She would have him do exercises to stretch his diaphragm, to train his ear to hear the most minute fluctuations in his pitch. She introduced him to the history of opera, the stories behind the arias, the passion and heartbreak that had inspired the most famous composers. She didn't just teach him how to sing. She taught him how to feel. She taught him how to be a storyteller. "The voice is not just a muscle, Leo," she would say, her hands moving gracefully through the air as if conducting an invisible orchestra. "It is the soul made visible. Every note, every phrase, every breath is a word in the language of the human heart. You must not just sing the notes, you must live them." The lessons with her were a form of magic, a slow, methodical unlocking of a potential Leo had never truly understood. He practiced with a newfound purpose, spending hours in his room, singing until his voice was raw, until the arias became a part of him, a second skin. The next competition was a national one, held at a grand, historic opera house in the city. The stakes were impossibly high. He would be competing against students who had been training their entire lives, students from the most prestigious art schools in the country. The prize was a full scholarship to a summer program at a major music conservatory, a chance to immerse himself in the world he had only ever dreamed of. The night before the competition, Leo sat on his bed, his legs crossed, the sheet music for his chosen aria, Nessun Dorma, from the opera Turandot, spread out on his lap. The notes, once a bewildering jumble of foreign symbols, now felt like a familiar map, a guide to a place he was finally ready to go. His mother came in, her face etched with a familiar worry. She sat beside him and put her hand on his shoulder. "You're nervous, baby?" she asked, her voice soft. Leo nodded. "This is different, Mom. This is a whole other level. What if I'm not good enough?" "That's a silly thing to say," she said, a small knowing smile on her face. "You're not just good enough, Leo. You're more than enough. You're a miracle. The people out there, they don't know that yet. They'll know it tomorrow night. You just go out there and you let them hear what we hear every single day. You let them hear your heart." She got up, kissed him on the forehead, and turned off the light. He was alone with his thoughts. The stage, the audience, the stakes, it all loomed over him, a terrifying, beautiful specter. But in the quiet darkness, he wasn't just thinking of the competition. He was thinking of his mother's tired hands, his father's weary face, Mr. Harrison's grudging nod, Principal Evans's unwavering belief, and Mrs. Vance's gentle guidance. He wasn't just singing for himself anymore. He was singing for them, for a promise, for a dream that had somehow, impossibly become real. He took a deep breath, the diaphragm stretching, the lungs filling with air, and in the silence of his small room, he began to sing, the opening notes of Nessun Dorma, a low, hopeful whisper against the darkness. He was ready. The air in the Grand Opera House was thick with anticipation. It hummed with the energy of 1,000 people, a silent, vibrating chord of expectation. Leo stood in the wings, the heavy velvet curtain a dark, smothering presence. He could hear the hushed whispers of the audience, the low, melodic thrum of the orchestra tuning. His heart, a frantic hummingbird in his chest, threatened to fly away. This was not the small, historic theater of his first victory. This was a cathedral of music, a hallowed ground that seemed to demand perfection. He was a kid from the projects, a boy who had once sung in the quiet anonymity of his bedroom, about to step into a world that felt alien and impossibly grand. A hand rested on his shoulder. It was Mr. Harrison, dressed in the same impeccably tailored suit from the first competition. He didn't say anything. He simply looked at Leo, his face still a careful mask of professionalism. But his eyes, for the first time, held no judgment. They held a silent, unwavering command, a challenge. "You are here. You belong here. Now show them why." The message was clear. Leo nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the unspoken trust. His name was called, the announcement echoing through the cavernous space. Next, from Jefferson Middle School, we have Leo Davis, performing Nessun Dorma, from the opera Turandot. He walked onto the stage, the sudden, blinding light of the spotlight swallowing him whole. He couldn't see the audience, couldn't see the faces of the judges, couldn't even see his family. He was alone in a vast, empty space, a single note in a grand, empty score. His knees felt weak. He took a deep, shuddering breath, his mind a panicked whirlwind. What if he failed? What if he was a fraud? What if this had all been a beautiful, fleeting dream that was about to shatter? Then, in the silence, he heard it. Not with his ears, but with his soul. The opening notes of Nessun Dorma, played by the orchestra, were a familiar, hopeful whisper. It was a melody he had sung 1,000 times, a song that had become a part of him. He closed his eyes and let the music take over. He wasn't on a stage anymore. He was in his room, the moonlight streaming through the window. He was in Mrs. Vance's studio, his voice learning to soar. He was in Mr. Harrison's music room, his diaphragm remembering its purpose. He was at the kitchen table, singing for his mother's tired smile and his father's hopeful heart. He opened his eyes. The fear was gone, replaced by a quiet, settled determination. The first words of the aria, a slow, melodic lament, were a prayer, a promise, a confession. His voice, once a raw, unbridled instrument, was now a thing of breathtaking beauty and control. It swelled, a powerful, emotional torrent that filled the space, vibrating against the ancient walls of the opera house. Every note was a story, a testament to a journey, a defiance of the odds. He sang of love, of loss, of hope, and of the unyielding strength of the human spirit. He poured his entire being into the music, not for the judges, not for the audience, but for himself, for the quiet boy who had kept his talent a secret for so long. He built to the final crescendo, a soaring, powerful climax that required every ounce of his skill. He took a final deep breath, and with a voice that was both a whisper and a roar, he sang the final triumphant words, "Vincero, Vincero. I will win. I will win." The final note hung in the air, a bell of pure sound that seemed to linger long after he had stopped singing. The silence that followed was more powerful than any applause. It was a stunned, collective gasp, a held breath of 1,000 people who had just witnessed something truly extraordinary. And then, as if a dam had broken, the applause came, a deafening, thunderous wave of sound that rose from the seats and crashed over the stage. It was not polite. It was a roaring, standing ovation from every corner of the theater. The people were on their feet, their faces a mixture of awe, admiration, and pure, unadulterated joy. Leo, his heart a symphony of gratitude, bowed again and again, the spotlight a warm, comforting presence on his skin. Backstage, his parents were the first to reach him. His mother, her face a mess of happy tears, wrapped him in a hug so tight it almost knocked the wind out of him. "I told you, baby," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I told you." His father, his hands now trembling with pride instead of worry, clapped him on the shoulder, his smile wider and more genuine than Leo had ever seen it. And then Mr. Harrison walked over, his face still a carefully constructed mask, but his eyes, when they met Leo's, were different. They were no longer cold and unyielding. They were warm, and they held something that looked a lot like a quiet, profound respect. "That," he said, his voice low and gruff, "was a masterpiece, Davis. You didn't just sing. You performed." It was the only compliment he would ever give, and it meant more to Leo than 1,000 standing ovations. The final announcement was made a few minutes later. The judges' voices, calm and professional, declared Leo the winner of the grand prize. A full scholarship to the summer program at the City Conservatory, a chance to continue his education and to continue doing what he loved. The future was no longer a distant, impossible dream. It was a clear, tangible path stretching out before him, a road paved with hard work, sacrifice, and the unwavering belief of the people who had seen his talent before he had even believed in it himself. Leo left the theater that night, not as the quiet boy who had once been laughed at, but as a young man who had found his voice. He had a family who believed in him, mentors who would guide him, and a future that was no longer an echo of his past, but a beautiful, harmonious song that was only just beginning. The symphony of his life, once a quiet, almost silent melody, was now a soaring, triumphant aria. And he was the one conducting it. Dear viewer, if you've watched up to this point, thank you for your support. I have a small request. If you enjoy my stories, you can subscribe to the channel, and don't hesitate to share your thoughts about the stories in the comments. Enjoy watching. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video.